Thank you all for gathering here. This is a better turnout, certainly than we expected, but it's symptomatic of how strong the sentiment is locally in the community here in Simsbury and Avon and the surrounding area in defense of local control of decision making. People across Connecticut are engaged in their communities. They love their town and city. They want to preserve all that is wonderful about it. The history in our neighborhoods, the open space and greenery, and they want input in the decisions that are made about their neighborhoods. State Statute 830G and the new law, House Bill 8002, signed by Governor Lamont, undermine those great qualities of Connecticut communities that people want a say and deserve a say in how decisions are made about their town, their city, their neighborhood. The potential 830G project for over 600 unit apartment complexes without local zoning control here in Simsbury is one of many cases across the state of local control being totally disregarded by this governor and state government with no changes, and yet the underlying crisis of affordability continuing to go unaddressed. We stand here today to offer an alternative, a true plan and way forward to make Connecticut more affordable, to reduce the property tax burden, to ensure that we can have more housing that is affordable with local buy-in while defending local control of decision making. Today, I'm offering a three-pronged approach, a grand bargain approach that will make Connecticut more affordable, that will make housing more available, and will defend local control of decision making in the process. The first part of that three-point plan is our plan to cap and reduce the property tax burden in Connecticut. We have announced it already, but it is vital to making housing more affordable, so we are reiterating it today. If Connecticut's property tax burden was only the same as the average state in Connecticut, our housing costs as a percentage of income would be below average compared to other states around the country. And yet under this governor, the property tax burden has continued to spiral out of control as he's imposed new unfunded mandates on our towns and cities without offering compensatory or offsetting state funding for educational cost sharing or other vital needs. We need to remove hundreds of those unfunded mandates on our towns and cities, reform our tax exempt system where large hospital systems and universities aren't compelled to pay their fair share of taxes, ensure that the state funding for our towns and cities is predictable and fair and goes up with costs, and that we cap the property tax burden into the future. Second, our plan calls for, yes, expanding the supply of housing and reducing the cost of housing for Connecticut families. These reforms must come in concert with rolling back 830G and House Bill 8002, which undermine local control. But if we have that trade, if we have that grand bargain, we can make the type of reforms that increase the supply of housing, reduce the cost of housing, and do so in a way that towns and communities are more likely to embrace. That starts with undoing the bottleneck in the trades, in the construction industry, where we need to bring in more young people, more skilled professional in the buildings trades, and reduce the bottleneck there. We just met a young man, a 13-year-old, who himself is trying to popularize or repopularize the buildings trades among young people in the state. Well, I'm here and my colleagues are here to also say the state government plays a role in that. We need to make it easier to obtain a license to work in the buildings trades. We need to zero out, eliminate licensing fees for anyone working in the building trades. And for people who want to come to Connecticut and work in Connecticut and are already licensed to work in those trades in other states, we should make it easier to recognize their license. And by the way, this state should not artificially suppress and cap the number of apprenticeships for young people trying to go into those apprenticeships. We should also look at how we can reform building codes and other state laws and policies which restrict the amount of small-scale housing, the smaller complexes, including things like reforming in a way that also protects public safety, things like building codes, stairwell regulations, maybe looking again at the Golden Girls rule to allow 3 unrelated people to live in a household, as well as making it easier to develop the small scale housing like accessory dwelling units, like more residential units in mixed use areas. Think of the little apartments above the shops in a downtown. So we have truly walkable neighborhoods, mixed use neighborhoods, the things that make downtowns vibrant and also good for small businesses. We can create more housing and do so in a way with local buy-in. And we can do these while protecting local control. The third part of my plan for a grand bargain on housing and local control is to roll back 830G and House Bill 8002, which are giving fits to local communities like Simsbury, like Avon, and so many other towns and cities across our state. Democrats and Republicans alike saying, Governor Lamont, state government, why are you getting in the way of us being able to make decisions for ourselves and our own communities? So, for instance, other states do not have such aggressive anti-local control laws as the state of Connecticut. There's a law called 40B in Massachusetts that says, yeah, developers have a remedy if they disagree with the town zoning decisions, but it can't be more than a few units high. It has size restrictions. But in Connecticut, 830G is such an aggressive law that you can propose over 600 units without local zoning buy-in. That is just plain wrong, and it's totally unreasonable. And other states don't have laws as aggressive as Connecticut's. It's been on the books for over 30 years, but it's totally failed at making our state affordable. It's only created consternation and conflict between our towns and our state government. We need to have a collaborative approach between our towns and our state government, not an adversarial approach that's been promoted by the governor and the state government over many years. So why isn't senior housing fully counted in 830G? Why isn't workforce housing, lower middle income housing counted towards 830G? It is impossible to reach the 10% requirement because almost nothing counts as affordable, even if it's actually affordable. All forms of affordable housing should count. More towns would actually be able to achieve the permanent moratorium under 830G. Instead, we have this totally unreasonable and insurmountable system that gives big developers the right to do what they want and creates fits for towns who understand that we need to protect open space, we need to protect infrastructure, and that the people on the ground locally know best for their community rather than big developers from out of state and bureaucrats in Hartford. We, for instance, could also allow, if a town adopts a housing growth zone, similar to what was talked about in 8002, they could get a permanent moratorium from 830G. But the point is that we can get all these things done with leadership that is assertive and brings people together. As governor, I'll do that. It will not be in the second week before a bill goes into law that I start understanding it and make a decision whether to veto or sign it. I will always be at the table trying to bring people together as governor. And on this issue, we can accomplish a balance of every interest. We can protect local control. We can reduce the sky-high burden of our property taxes. We can make housing more affordable and available, but it's going to require a positive change and assertive leadership that brings people together. I would like to announce or invite some of my good colleagues behind me to speak. We have great stakeholders and experts from around the state in our state government here today with me. first my running mate, the great Matt Corey, to say a few words.
Thank you, Ryan. We should never discourage economic development or business investment, but we always need to ask the question, at what cost? When you look at what 830G has done around the state and how small businesses and economic development, people that are building these communities are circumventing local control. You know, the initial project here in Simsbury was a smaller footprint, and it was turned down by the local control and turned down by zoning and turned down by the Wetlands Commission. So what did the developer do? The developer increased the amount of units by suggesting they should be low-income units, 30%. So what did that do? It circumvented local control, went to the state. Still, environmentalists are fighting this. We have to understand what the impact is on the environment and what the impact is on local control. And it's not only happening in Simsbury, it's happening in several towns across the state of Connecticut where 830G is definitely circumventing. We need to repeal this law and bring common sense back to the government so we can have real economic development and have everyone that is in a local community have their input of what they want to be developed in their town. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I would also like to introduce Mike Chris, the first selectman of Harwinton and a candidate for the state senate in this district, the 8th district.
So for 16 years, we watched Hartford dictate to small towns all across the state that one size fits all. And the reality is one size does not fit all. The Blue Ribbon Committee back in the 90s determined that we needed to protect our local resources, our natural resources, in order to provide good quality water and supplies to the other communities, urban areas, down into Hartford and all that. If we continue to overdevelop Connecticut at the alarming rate that Hartford wants us to build, it's going to make Connecticut even more unaffordable. It's going to continue to drive people out of this state and continue to erode our communities that all of us have grown to love and be a part of. We all moved to these communities because we loved the rural character, the balance of rural character with commercial development, the local control. Local control is key to every single one of these communities. And as Harwinton's first selectman and as the candidate for the Senate 8th District, I have continued to fight for 16 years against Hartford's overreach and erosion of this local control and circumvent what the people in these communities want. They don't want Hartford telling them where they can build. They don't want Hartford telling them how many units they have to build. The 10% is a pie in the sky. Once those 20-year notes expire, you're below the 10% again. Guess what? You have to build more, and you have to build more, and you have to build more. Simsbury has been very progressive in thinking and changing their local zoning laws to make housing that fits their community. And every community is in the process of passing zoning laws and creating housing plans that fit our community. So when we talk about 830G and we talk about Hartford's overreach, we have to continue to stand up for our communities and stand together and say enough is enough. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This is not about how many units you can fit on one piece of property and how much you can circumvent local control. Local leaders, local zoning commissions, local planning commissions have stood up and have said enough is enough. We can do this. We don't need Hartford's help. And that's why I decided to run. That's why I've been the first selectman in Harwinton for 16 years, because I will not allow Hartford to overreach in our communities and continue to disrupt our way of life. Thank you.
I would like to also introduce candidate for House District 17, Andrew Ziemba, in this area.
Talking to several different people all throughout my district, the 17th district, Canton and Avon, the frustration has really gone completely out of control. People are really getting really frustrated with the fact that Hartford decides what we build in our communities and we don't have a say. Canton and Avon residents are very frustrated with the relentless attack on our local control. When we're looking at the fact that what this does to our municipal infrastructure, we look at what this does for water filtration, We look at what it is for the roads. We look at what it is for the first responders. First responders that I've talked to throughout Canton and Avon, a volunteer firefighter force that is, are frustrated because they're looking at it and saying, with the amount of decline that we've seen in volunteers, they're getting stretched too thin. I'm a strong advocate for our first responders in Canton and Avon, and I'm going to say this, Canton and Avon, we get to decide what's built in our communities. Full stop. I'm a strong supporter of repealing our 830G statute and the 8002, which was spearheaded by my opponent. I will never stop fighting for our small towns. These towns are unrecognizable based on what we've seen with some of the developments. And it's not to say that we don't need the right type of development. We do. There are some really good developments. I support Peachtree out in Avon and Boulder Ridge also in Canton. These are wonderful facilities. So, local control, extremely important. We must return control to our communities in Canton and Avon.
You know, when I spend 2 hours on the Senate floor speaking in defense of local control and against the overreach in Hartford, somehow this gentleman is able to outdo me. Senator Rob Sampson is the ranking member on the Housing Committee. He knows as much about this topic as anybody. He's been a great defender of local control and affordability in the state, and I'd like to introduce him to say a few words too.
Good afternoon, everybody. We will try not to outdo Ryan today. It's a tremendous privilege to be able to be here today and stand with the next governor of the state of Connecticut, Senator Ryan Fazio. As was mentioned, I happen to be the ranking member of the Housing Committee, but I'm also the ranking member of the Labor Committee. And a number of items that were mentioned today touch those committees very, very closely. And I'm certainly keenly aware of the problems that Connecticut residents, small towns across our state, big cities across our state are facing as a result of the policies that come from this administration and out of the one-party control that we've been facing for decades now. And the fact of the matter is that we need a change. At its root, most of these problems are affordability problems. When people complain about the cost of housing, they're talking about inflation. And they're also talking about the things that drive up the cost of housing. Electric rates. That is a key ingredient. Property taxes. Senator Fazio mentioned the failure of this administration and the Democrats over the last decade or so to properly fund education in our towns across Connecticut. What happens when that happens? When they fail to provide the money that towns need to provide for their education, they have to turn to local taxpayers. That means that they raise local property taxes. All of this is driving up the unaffordability of living in Connecticut, and it's also driving up the unaffordability of housing. What I want to say more than anything today is that the people out across Connecticut are the solution. They are the ones with the choice. They can take a look and see what this administration and the Democrats have done over the last couple of decades, and they can weigh them against their recent attention to the notion of affordability. But the buck stops with them. They have not solved the problem. They give it a lot of lip service, but Connecticut's one of the most unaffordable places in this country with some of the highest taxes and electric rates. That's on them. But people have a choice. They can choose a different direction. They can choose the solution, and the solution is to elect Ryan Fazio as our next governor. Thank you.
Thank you.